go with the practice. Excel V for me is like really focused on all vascular. It's really, you can have much more, let's say, power and pulse durations and spot sizes, and you can really play more.
So the Excel V was designed actually starting from an inquiry that Cutera did with laser users that are pretty famous in the United States and that are experienced laser users, knowing that we had the technology in the egg already, but their questionnaire was especially focused on the pulse dye users, because the pulse dye laser was considered to be the golden standard to treat port wine stains. And actually, because Cutera purchased the laser scope, who already had a very powerful KTP system, they knew that KTP was also able to treat these port wine stains very effectively. So the idea was to have one system that could treat as many vascular problems as possible. So having two wavelengths, 1064 like in the ZO, but replacing the limelight for the more superficial vascular lesions and pigmented lesions by a 532 nanometer specific laser. The advantage of that is that we can, like Gwen says, have control over the fluence, spot size and pulse duration independently of each other, which was not possible or is not possible with limelight. Limelight, you have a fixed spot size which is rectangular. You have a pulse duration that is variable, but it's depending on the fluence. So with the KTP in the Excel V, it is really designed to have more control and even to be able to go to that purpuric reaction known in the pulse dye laser treatments. So we can have very, very short pulse duration. The power of that KTP is so big that we can have fluence even with a 8 to 10 millimeter spot size with very short pulse duration, like 5 milliseconds, 4 milliseconds. And if we go beneath this threshold of 6 millisecond pulse duration, we have almost all the time this purpuric reaction, if we want it. Of course, for a simple superficial cuperosis or telangiectasia, you don't need that purpuric reaction because it just extends your recovery time. So, but you're able to play with those parameters, just spot size, independently of each other. And then that survey with those specialists brought that they didn't like this spray cooling that Candela uses. They didn't like the air cooling because it's not so controlled. So the laser users that we inquired all prefer this contact cooling with sapphire, because that index matching, because it's a perfect controlled cooling to a certain temperature. With that index matching, you also have better visibility. If you compare that to the ZO, where we had the cooling before, if you compare that to the Excel V, your visibility of the vessels through that gel, through that sapphire window, is a little bit better than when you have the reflection of your lamp on the treatment table that is reflected on the skin, so it just hinders your visibility of the vessels that you need to treat. So that's also an advantage in the Excel V. So it's a very comprehensive system treating all those vascular lesions plus also the pigmented lesions. So 532 is green, very bright green light. We can treat port wine stains with it. We have pulse durations from 1.5 milliseconds to 40, and we can go up to spot sizes of 12 millimeters. So the power of that KTP laser is like almost 900 watts. Mm-hmm. So if you compare that to the small KTP lasers on the market, small boxes, they have like 8 watts. So it's like more than 100 times more power. And that's why we are able to get these big spot sizes with short pulse durations. So, and that's what we need. That's why it's comparable to a pulsed dye laser. So the idea that only pulsed dye laser was able to treat that was because there was no technology that was able to create pulses that are short enough with sufficient fluence and sufficient spot size. And now with the XLV, there is that technology. Then 64 is actually identical to the ZO. So all treatments that you can do with the ZO is in the XLV2. So the only difference there is the cooling method. It's just the sapphire window compared to pre and post cooling in the ZO.
He is a little bit more powerful. You have a little bit, when you use like 120 joules with the ZO, maybe with the XLV you have maybe the same result with 110. A little bit lower.
Yeah, but that's because of that index matching.
Probably.
Because you lose less energy by reflection. Yeah, that's the reason. So, 1064, 532. KTP is just a crystal making the light double in frequency. So if you double the frequency of the light, you will divide the wavelength by 2. So that's 532 is just half of 1064. Here you have the penetration depth. So 532, as I said, it's scattering a lot in the skin, so it stays very superficial, and 1064 from all the wavelengths is the most penetrating one. 532 is also has a very high absorption in melanin. So for the darker skin types, it's a wavelength that needs to be treated with very much care because this high melanin absorption. But that's the same with the limelight. So everything we said about limelight is a little bit applicable to this 532.
Here is, let's say, here it's more easy to treat one lentigo. You know what I mean? It's just where you adapt your spot size to the lentigo what you want to treat, and that's what you do. And then with the limelight, it's a bigger spot, so it's more difficult to treat just one lentigo if you want.
Here is again 532 an IPL that stays very superficial because of the scattering, and 1064 will penetrate deeper, and the penetration depends on the spot size. So if you want to limit that penetration depth, you just go to smaller spot sizes. So if you treat very superficial veins, you can limit that penetration depth by limiting the spot size. If you, in opposite, want to treat deeper vascular structure, then you need to increase the spot size. In the XLV, we currently can increase the spot size with 0.1 millimeter even, but nobody's using it, so we probably are going to abandon that system. So it will be possible to have spot sizes from 3 millimeter to 12 millimeter with a 1 millimeter increase. So this penetration depth, or the inability to penetrate deep, is both true for pulse dye and 532 nanometer lasers. So pulse dye is like 595, 590 nanometer, depending on the type of color that is used in that dye laser.
That means also that you have consumables.
Yeah, so the pulse dye laser is, I don't know if you know the difference. So Nd:YAG is a solid state crystal, so it's a solid state. It's pumped, the energy from that laser source is coming from a flash lamp. In the dye laser it's the same, but the active medium of your laser is a liquid. And in that liquid there is a dye, and every time the flash lamp hits that dye, it emits light, but the dye will deteriorate, so it will not be useful anymore. So it needs to be filtered out and replaced by a new dye. And that's what it's called, the filter plus the dye kit. And after so many pulses, like 5,000 pulses, you need to buy a new dye kit. So here in the XLV there is no consumable, there is no service cost, because it's all solid state technology. So the wavelength of the 532 is created by just diverting the Nd:YAG beam through that KTP crystal, and that makes it from infrared to green light. So here the spot size, the explanation why this small spot size is limiting the penetration depth, and a bigger spot size will increase the penetration.
I don't know why it is there.
Now this is, it's actually the 2D.
Yeah.
You can do, because on the XLV there is a Genesis V handpiece. It's the same Genesis procedure as with the Xeo. The only difference is the spot size. So instead of having a 5mm spot in the XLV, you have an 8mm spot. So you need slightly less pulses to do one Genesis treatment. There is, in this handpiece, it's a separate handpiece, so it's an optional handpiece. There is an aiming beam and a distance beam, let's say. So you're always sure to be at the right distance, and there is also an integrated temperature sensor that constantly measures the temperature of the skin. So you know at which level you're treating, and you know that you're staying at that same temperature level. There is a LED indicator on the handpiece and a digital indicator on the screen, displaying the real temperature of the skin that is constantly monitored. So here it's actually like the same with the Xeo for the 1064, and for the 532 you see that you can vary the pulse duration and the fluence. Leg veins is actually identical to the...
It is identical.
to
It's
the-
just, let's say, it's just a little bit more comfortable to work with. Let's say it like that. Because now you saw what I did. I was cooling, and then I go back, I shoot, and I cool again, and that's. But with the XLV, actually, I don't need to do it. I just stay, because the cooling is in the lens. So actually, I don't move so much anymore. So it's, let's say, a little bit more comfortable.
We see with the facial treatments of the KTP, I would say it's a little bit more effective than with Limelight, but you also have more downtime. There is more swelling after one KTP treatment. So that's the big difference. But also with that big spot size, we call that a global treatment. You will go over the face, scanning almost, and your treatment will be done in 15 minutes. So This is
It's like, let's say it's the for explain that you, let's say, start with the feeders.
yes.
That's what we saw.
So
Sometimes they
within
say this didn't work, it came back, and you have to retreat and retreat every time again. It's just because they didn't close the reticular or the feeder vein. That's the reason.
we sometimes use this vein light
Yeah.
to have a more visible sight of those feeder veins that are sitting more deeply.
Mm.
I think it's useful.
Yeah. So don't treat varicose veins. Yep. That's what you don't want to do. So that means varicose needs another type of treatment. You don't do laser on it.
No, you will do this endovenous treatment or venous. But I think it's mostly done by vascular surgeons, those procedures.
So here you have this reticular vein. Actually, what I just want to add, when I treat a reticular vein, I never do one shot after the other. So that means I have a little bit of space between the two shots. You remember that I just did a shot and a little bit farther away I did the second one. So I am, like, let's say my technique is a little bit different when I treat reticular veins or periorbital veins. So I'm cooling, I'm shooting, and I'm pushing a little bit, and then I do a little space in between, and then I do the next shot. But I want actually just closing the feeder without too much shots, because we are still doing, let's say, a stated treatment. You know what I mean? So I'm just looking just for closing, and that's it. All the superficial ones I close really one shot after the other, like a zipper. So here it's like, this is more blue, it's more what you had, let's say let's say, so what I did, I changed my spot size to 5 millimeters for more the superficial blue ones, and I went a little bit down with my jewels because the blue coloration was there, so I don't need so much energy, and I was not so short with my pulse durations because it's very blue. Otherwise, when I give it too short in time, then you have this pop, and then you break it down. So that's what you don't want. Otherwise, you will have a blue for several times, and it's not nice. So, as long as that you understand this difference between the milliseconds, that you, when you hear this plop, you just change your milliseconds a little bit longer, but you stay with your same joules probably. Okay. So. Test pulses is so important. You saw that what I did for on guts, on the nose, I just did one shot. And then I'm looking if it's working or not. When it's working, why changing? You see what I mean? Otherwise I can always, let's say, shorten a little bit the time or a little bit higher in my pulse, or in my joules. Always one shot after the other. Remind the patient of expectations. So after a vascular treatment, they have redness. It's like a cat who scratches on the leg. That's endpoint. That's totally normal. So it is less beautiful after the treatment, and that's normal. So that will go away slowly, and the final results will be like in 6 weeks. It will go away slowly. And if you need another treatment, you wait at least between 2 and 3 months. Otherwise, you will retreat an area that is still, let's say, repairing itself. Okay?
So this one is an important slide. I think we can have the same with, we can replace 532 by limelight because it's the same superficial action we have. So pigment and vascular lesions for superficial, we will use 532 or limelight. If it's deeper and larger, we will use 1064. For the spot size, if we want to treat superficial veins with 1064 especially, we need to decrease the spot size. So we will probably on the ZO use the 3mm spot size. The pulse duration we need to adapt to what we call the thermal relaxation time. So it's the time needed for a vascular structure to cool down again. So once we raise it to a certain temperature, it takes some time to cool down. That's what we call the thermal relaxation time. And we need to adapt our pulse duration to that size and to that thermal relaxation time. So the smaller the vessels are, the shorter the pulse duration should be. Otherwise, if the pulse duration is too long, we will not heat that small structure fast enough, and we will lose part of the energy to the surroundings. So it needs to be fast enough. If it's too fast, you will have the phenomenon that Gwen talked about, that we hear that popping noise and we break the vessel. So that's not the purpose of our treatment. It's not bad.
No.
It's just a blue spot that we will have, and it will heal. But we can avoid it by just raising that pulse duration. So the fluence, the darker the vascular lesion is, the more absorption there will be for 1064. So the more absorption, the less fluence. So if it's more like a pink vessel, then it will be much harder for that vessel to absorb the light, and then we need to increase the fluence. So it's just the opposite. So pink, small, need high fluence, low pressure, dark vessels. Large vessels have a lot of chromophore, so therefore need less energy. Cooling, of course, cooling is always important to get that safety profile. Here you have an indication, the deep reticular, 40 to 50 milliseconds, larger spider veins, 30 to 40, and the small pink, 10 to 15 milliseconds.
When you treat like around the feet, there is much more pressure on it. You have to go. So that means that you have to give a little bit more energy on the feet, because it's much more further away from the heart. So also that you have to adapt a little bit. So when you have like the 532, let's say when you treat a light lantigo on a light skin, that means there's not so much chromophore. That means you have to work with higher energy. It's logical, because the chromophore is very low. Imagine that it's a very dark spot, you go lower in your joules. It's always the same. It's the same with hair removal. When you have a dark hair, you go down in your joules, and when you have a light colored or fine hair, you go up with your joules. It's the same idea.
Here is one important thing. So the shorter the pulse duration, the more power you use from the machine, so the more aggressive you are. So if you're in doubt, if you think your skin type may be too dark, or you always have to think, what's my risk? And then a longer pulse duration will reduce that risk. So in a darker skin type, we always go to the longer pulse durations. We only use that more aggressive settings if the skin type allows us to. So if we have a very light skin type, we can be more aggressive than on the darker skin types. And more aggressive means shorter pulse durations. And in the limelight for the ZO, for example, that means you would switch to program A, which gives you the shorter pulse durations. And if you're scared, if you think it might be too aggressive, you go to B or C. One of the big advantages of the Excel V is Gwen showed on the ZO that guideline to go to the settings for the reticular veins, so it helps you choosing the right parameters. On the XLV, it's even more advanced because you have all the settings that are integrated in that single machine, and the handpiece itself contains this telescopic lens that you move like in a Zeo with this green ring. In the XLV, this lens is motorized, so it's a motor that moves the lens and makes your desired spot size. So in the XLV, you can have all combinations of parameters that are very efficient to treat one indication, all combined. So it will determine the fluence, the spot size, the cooling, and the pulse duration. So the only thing you still need to determine is your speed of treatment. So the treatment hertz, that so to say. So it's really a system that has a very short learning curve, because the proposed parameters are very, very effective already. So it takes just some small adjustments once you have passed that learning curve to be even more effective. So this is what I explained. Because we use this sapphire cooling window, we lose less energy by reflection of the light on the skin. Therefore, if you use the XLV, your fluence is probably lower than the ones that you would use with the Zeo. So if you are a Zeo user and you pass on to an XLV, you have to be careful. So you have to adapt your parameters a little bit to what you're used to. Here it's the same, because the spot size is much different. We have a 5mm spot on the Zeo and an 8mm spot on the XLV, so it's different. In the Zeo we use 14 to 18 joules per centimeter squared sometimes. On the XLV, the maximum is like 7.
Comes back a little bit.
So that's what we already discussed. The temperature of the window is, you have more variability in the temperature that you can choose, but actually I almost always use the 5 degrees C to be more on the safe side. It's only for very light pigment that I would use a higher window temperature. So this is true for
Everything.
for all
the
lasers.
all the
So
lasers.
it's creating the right patient expectations, telling the patients how many treatments they will need, and just don't be too exact, because it's never really exactly predictable.
And I take pictures always from the patients. It's so important, because there's changing, like, let's say, slowly changing. Let's say when you do skin rejuvenation, you don't remember actually how it was before, because it's going better and better very slowly, and she is looking in the mirror every morning, so you don't see really the change. And then when you make a picture, let's say 6 months later, then you really see the difference, and then they understand actually what they did. So it's really important. So goggles, what we didn't do.
Sometimes you saw that Gwen used that clear glasses. We can supply them with XLV, but it's dangerous, because if you switch from 1064 to 532 and you forget that you have the wrong safety eyewear, then you are really in trouble, because the light from the KTP 532 is so bright that you are blinded for several minutes and you're not able to continue your work. So it's very important to have the right adapted glasses, safety eyewear. So here you have that tab on the top. Tap here to select the 532 nanometer application. That's something you need to think before you select. So you select the wavelength in the bottom. If you want to treat something more volume, darker blue, 1064. If it's more red, superficial, you choose 532. And then you go to the skin type. For example, you choose photo rejuvenation and you select red brown scromia, and then the system will select those parameters for you and adjust the spot size to 10 millimeter, adjust the fluence, etc. So you're able to start immediately. Genesis V treatment is actually the same discussion as with the Genesis for the Zio. The only thing that is different is the spot size and that handpiece that has the temperature feedback.
So that means that for the Excel V, the Genesis treatments, I give only 7,000 pulses for full face. Because the spot size is bigger, so it goes quicker. And at 8mm spot size, it's still at 1064, so it means it goes a little bit deeper. I have the feeling that it is a little bit more quicker results. That's
with
the Genesis V, because you go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, because of the spot size.
Yes.
This was something we did in the early days of Laser Genesis, where we did electron microscopy to show that there was really new collagen formation after some months after the treatment.
It's the same, you can go through. It's the same as with the, of course, the indications are the same from the Genesis, from the Zio, than the Genesis from the Excel V. So when somebody has herpes, so like, how do you say that? So like a spot on the lip, herpes? Herpes, is it?
Yeah.
So when they have it, don't do Genesis. Because you will heat. It's like when you have it and you go in the sun, you will, let's say, stimulate it. So when somebody has active herpes, you just don't do the Genesis, you do it 2 weeks later. Okay.
Yeah, cleaning the skin is something that is important. We had one patient in a clinic in Antwerp, and there was a lady that wanted to have the laser Genesis treatment, and she was, just before the treatment, went horse riding, and there was so much dust on her face that you couldn't see, and they started to do the treatment without cleaning the face before, and it was like all sparking light on those dust particles, and it was also very painful. Then we stopped and we said, did you clean your face? And then they started to clean the face, and it was all black dust coming off, and that was just absorbing all the energy. So cleaning the face, especially in laser genesis, is very important.
You see it also when people have white pores with brown spots inside of it?
Yes.
Sometimes they pop out.
Yeah.
It's not so very nice, but it clears out. It takes all the energy, so... Okay.
And we shouldn't use topical anesthetic to do that treatment. We have to have that patient feedback. Same with Titan. Titan treatments need the patient feedback, because otherwise we can even damage the skin if we want.
Even with vascular treatments, I never use anesthesia, even on the legs. I prefer to cool.
You don't use gel on Genesis?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Next one is any questions about the Excel V?
Or you see a little bit the difference?
HR.
HR? HR. Thank you. You're on the news.